Hello, I'm Helen Good, and I'm part of the Elizabethan Star Chamber project, which is trying to make sense of the National Archives class STAC 5. Once again, members of the Beyond Shakespeare Company have taken time out from recording every play written in English before the Civil War to read some Star Chamber with me. Following the Beyond Shakespeare method, we're going to just read some text and then discuss it. And the topic for today's video is the late 1590s government crackdown on corruption in the impressment of troops. So, to introduce our wonderful readers, first today is...
Lois Potter. I'm in London. I'm a retired, but not very retiring academic.
And our second reader is...
Liza Graham, also in London. I hope to retire one day from all of the things that I do.
And the third reader is...
Rachael, actor on the East Coast, currently not planning to retire anytime soon.
And the fourth and final reader is...
Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm not retired, I'm just tired.
Fine. Thank you very much. Okay, all these cases today, and there are 3 of them, are brought by the Queen's Attorney General, Edward Cook. The first, which is the Attorney General and Latham, comes from Wiltshire and is from 1597. Go, reader number 1.
To the Queen's most excellent Majesty, showeth and informeth your most excellent Majesty, Edward Cook, Esquire, your Highness Attorney General, that whereas about All Hallowtide last past, by order and direction from the Right Honourable, the Lords and others of your Highness most Honourable Privy Council, unto the Justice of the Peace of the County of Wiltshire, for the mustering, pressing, and setting forth of soldiers to be employed in your Majesty's service for the defence of your Isle of Wight, divers and sundry persons, that is to say, John Wallace, Thomas Cox, Christopher Weeks, Randall Skilling, Thomas Harding, John Hicks, Robert Tapping, Richard Goddard, John Umpton, Edward Platt, James Lacker, Thomas Crack, William Mudge, William Reed, John Isles, John Kerr, John Ballard, Andrew Brown, Walter Andrews, John Schumer, William Kent, John Tarrant, William Walter, Lawrence Bullitt, Thomas Checker, John Shadwell, and Edmund Hall, with divers others, were pressed, made ready, furnished with furniture of war, and set forth for your Majesty's service within the Isle of Wight, and were there delivered unto and under the conduct and charge of one Latham, a captain, entertained in your Majesty's service, where Captain Latham, according to his allegiance and duty, should have led and trained the said persons, so that he might always have had them in a readiness for your Majesty's said service, whensoever occasion should have required, until they should have been duly discharged.
But so it is, may it please your Majesty, that the said Captain Latham and Thorpe his lieutenant, not having the fear of God before their eyes, but in contempt of your Majesty's laws and neglect of their allegiance and duties towards your Highness' service upon a greedy desire of making unlawful gain and profit to themselves, did shortly, upon the receipt of the said soldiers, cause public proclamation to be made, that if any of the soldiers committed to their charge were willing to depart, that then all such willing to depart should draw themselves together and thereupon repair unto the said Captain Latham or to his officers and receive order for their discharges. And so Captain Latham, in the month of November last past, about the end of the said month, did confederate, compact, and agree with divers of his followers, and especially with one Furneys, one Marshall, and the said Thorpe, for discharging the said persons out of your Majesty's service.
By means whereof Furneys, by the appointment and direction of Captain Latham in the month of November last past, near towards end of the said month in the Isle of Wight, did corruptibly, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of John Wallis £5 of lawful English money for his discharge from your Majesty's service, and thereupon Captain Latham did then and there discharge him, Wallis, from your Majesty's service, and took from him one corslet with all the furniture, and delivered the same to Furneys, which afterwards Latham and Furneys converted and employed to their own private uses.
And Marshal, by the appointment and with the privity of Captain Latham, did then and there corruptile and unjustly and extortively take and receive of the said Thomas Cox £5 of like money for his discharge from your Majesty's service there, and thereupon Latham did discharge Cox from your service, and took from him one other corslet with all furniture, which Captain Latham and Marshal converted and employed to their own private uses.
And Captain Latham did then and there also compound with Christopher Weeks for 40 shillings for his discharge from your Majesty's service, therewith sum of 40 shillings was then and there by the appointment and with the privity of Captain Latham paid by Weeks unto Thorpe, the lieutenant. And they, Latham and Thorpe, then and there also took from Weeks his musket and furniture, and converted and employed the same to their own uses. And thereupon Weeks was discharged by Captain Latham or by his direction.
And Thorpe, by the appointment and direction of Captain Latham, did then and there likewise corruptly, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of Randall Skilling 30 shillings for his discharge from the service, and take from Skilling his caliver and furniture, and afterwards employed and converted the same to their own uses. And Captain Latham did then and there discharge Skilling from the service.
And also Captain Latham did then and there corruptly and unjustly compound with Thomas Harding for 30 shillings for his discharge from the service, which sum of 30 shillings was paid by Harding to Thorpe by the direction and appointment of Captain Latham, and the said Thorpe took from him by the appointment of Captain Latham a corslet and the furniture, and employed the same to their own uses, and thereupon Captain Latham did discharge Harding from the service.
And Thorpe, by the appointment and at the direction of Captain Latham, did then and there likewise so corruptly, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of John Hicks 30 shillings for his discharge from your Majesty's service there, and took from him, he said the said Hicks, caliver and the furniture, and converted and employed the same to their own uses. And Captain Latham did there and then discharge Hicks from your Majesty's service there.
And further, Thorpe, by the appointment and direction of Captain Latham, did then and there likewise corruptively, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of Robert Tapping 30 shillings, of Richard Goddard 30 shillings, of James Locker 32 shillings, of William Mudge 40 shillings, of William Reed 35 shillings, of John Kerr 30 shillings, of John Ballard 40 shillings, of Andrew Brown 40 shillings, of William Andrews 40 shillings, of John Tarrant 30 shillings, of William Walter 30 shillings, of Lawrence Bulpit 26 shillings and 8 pence, of Thomas Checker 27 shillings and 10 pence, and took from them their corslets, muskets, calivers, and furnitures, and converted and employed them to their own uses. And then and there Captain Latham did discharge them from your Majesty's service there.
And further, Captain Latham did then and there corruptly, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of John Upton 20 shillings in money, and his armour and furniture was delivered unto one Ferris by Captain Latham's appointment. Then and there Captain Latham did discharge the said Upton from the service.
And further one Thomas Water by the appointment of Captain Latham did take of Edward Plate 40 shillings for his discharge, whereof Water did deliver unto Captain Latham 10 shillings, and the rest he gave to one that should serve in the stead of Plate. And thereupon Plate was discharged.
And further, Captain Latham did then and there discharge Thomas Crook from the service, in respect whereof the said Crook did then and there give unto one that should serve in his place, by the appointment of Captain Latham 33 shillings and fourpence. And Captain Latham did take him from Crook his frieze jerkin, and thereupon discharged him.
And Captain Latham did then and there take and receive extortatively of John Isles 11 shillings in money, and the corslet, and the furniture, and thereupon did discharge him from the same service.
And further, Captain Latham then and there did corruptly and extortively take of one John Sherner, father unto John Sherner, 20 shillings for the discharging of John Sherner the son from the service, and did take of him also 3 shillings and sixpence for his son's diet, and 2 shillings sixpence for the trimming of his corslet, which corslet Captain Latham did likewise take from Sherner the son. And thereupon Captain Latham did then and there discharge John Sherner the son from the service.
And also Captain Latham did then and there corruptly, unjustly, and extortively take and receive of William Kent 40 shillings for his discharge from the service, and 7 shillings for his diet, and took from him, Kent, his corslet and the furniture. And thereupon Captain Latham did then and there discharge Kent from your Majesty's service.
And further, Captain Latham, having received from your Majesty's pay for all such soldiers as were under his conduct, he, Captain Latham, refused to pay John Shadwell and Edward Hall their wages or any part thereof, whereby both Shadwell and Hall were compelled to live upon their own charge, and yet they served there during all the time of service.
And your Majesty's Attorney General informeth your Majesty also that with the corslets before mentioned, there were kept back by Captain Latham and Thorpe to the number of 24 corslets of the company of the said county of Wiltshire that were under his charge. And they, Captain Latham and Thorpe, did take from the rest of the pikemen of the same company all their polerans, vambraces, and traces, and did also detain in their hands sundry of the soldiers' muskets with their furnitures, whereby the county of Wiltshire have lost in their furnitures about the value of 400 pounds. And Thorpe being required by the constable to deliver unto him the arms, he, Thorpe, would have had the said Thorpe did offer to stab him. And the county of Wiltshire are by those means greatly disfurnished.
All which extortions, offences, procurement, and other misdemeanors, Captain Latham, Furneys, Marshall, and Thorpe have committed long since your Highness General pardon, and have done to the great hindrance of your Majesty's service, and in contempt of your Highness and your laws of this realm, to the great damage and loss of your Majesty's subjects within the county of Wiltshire, and to the evil example of others ready to commit the like offences, except some condign punishment be by your Majesty inflicted upon the offenders.
May it therefore please your Majesty to grant your most gracious writ of subpoena to be decreed unto the said John Latham, Thorpe, Marshall, and Furneys, commanding them and every of them thereby at a certain day and under a certain pain, therein to be limited personally to appear before your highness in your majesty's court of Star Chamber, and there to answer the premises and to receive such punishment as by the order of the said court shall be inflicted upon them.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot to say there, but if we could just get Captain Latham's quick answer, we'll say it. Off you go, Captain Latham.
The said defendant saith that as to any corruption, extortion, combination, unlawful taking of money, or converting and employing thereof, or any part thereof to this defendant's private use, or refusing to pay to any soldier his due wages, or any part thereof, or any other offenses or misdemeanors in the said information mentioned, or any part thereof, he, this defendant for himself, saith that he is not of this same or any, nor any part thereof guilty in such manner and form as in the said information is supposed and alleged, and most humbly prayeth that therefore he may be dismissed out of this honorable court.
And that is the totality from the defense. Has anybody got anything to ask or say? Rachael was first, followed by Eric.
Was there a standing army at this time in England? Is that how is this coming about, or what have they been assembled for if they're not a standing army? Was there a specific threat that soldiers were being trained for, or just in general?
We were at war with Spain. There was a standing army in Ireland of sorts, but armies, there wasn't a regular army as we would know it. There was a conscript army for specific events, but the channel had to be defended for fear of Spanish landings. And there was always the problem of the French. Eric.
Well, I was going to ask is basically this is a corruption charge, but he's not been like, did court martialing exist? Not court, military courts marshaling exist at this time, or was that not a thing?
I have very, very little knowledge about that. I certainly have never heard of any military courts except in Ireland, while on campaign. Obviously, a certain amount of looting and rape and disobedience to orders would be punished summarily on campaign. This, however, was, these people were effectively mercenaries, the people like Captain Latham. They were taking a job. They could just as easily have gone and taken a job with the Netherlands resistance, or, well, you'll see when you read Stukely. Lois.
Yeah, I suppose I'm the initial charge states this all as having happened. It doesn't say that somebody said it happened. And then the defense is just, no, I didn't do any of that. I'm just wondering, who was the whistleblower, or were there quite a few of them? Do we get witnesses at any point?
Not in this case. I imagine that this case actually went into Star Chamber and they probably actually heard the witnesses, rather that the evidence would be taken, but it would be superseded by oral evidence in Star Chamber, though I don't know that for a fact. But it certainly is so circumstantial that you imagine that there's been somebody out there taking notes. The Lord Lieutenant of Wiltshire would have been probably the principal whistleblower, because the property of the county was being stolen. because all these arms and corselets and whatever belonged to Wiltshire.
Did they belong to Wiltshire, or did the soldiers themselves furnish them?
They belonged to Wiltshire.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. It says here that they belonged to Wiltshire. They were part of the Wiltshire's store of arms. Certainly when you get musters, there are people who are charged with finding a corselet, a pike. They have to turn out furnished at their own charges. But this is different. This isn't a muster. This is an impressment. These people have been taken into the army and have managed to find someone who will sell them a discharge.
Yes. And to Lois's question about the whistleblowers, I'm guessing that, if I had to guess, which I'm gonna because guessing is fun, I would guess that maybe John Shadwell and Edward Hall, to whom he refused to pay any wages, might have been the ones.
Yes, they had less to lose than people who had managed to escape service.
Yeah, would the people who managed to escape service be liable to any penalty for doing that?
I don't know. I don't see the government chasing them. This was part of a big government crackdown. And as far as I can tell, it's the people who take the money that the government is after, not the people who have, I mean, they're not saying that Bullpit approached Latham and said, please, can I give you some money? What they're saying is that a proclamation was made, a public proclamation, line up here if you want to buy your way out. And I think the variety of the fee, of the amounts paid, show they were taking whatever they could.
Yeah, if I'd been a £5 man, I'd have been very annoyed that some people got off for 20 shillings.
Well, they shouldn't have had £5 on them, or friends worth £5. Eric.
My question was, I actually forgot the question, but anyway, yeah, like sort of they basically paid to get out of the army. So why did they go in the first place? And also, wasn't this the regime that was kind of bankrupt anyway? Which I'm guessing that's why they were cracking down on this. Otherwise, yeah.
Well, they were cracking down on it because it was, people were making money out of, yes, the regime was broke, but they were cracking down on it because it was wrong.
Yes, that too.
And, you know, and although the people who got out might have been quite pleased, it was generally felt to be a bad thing. And this was, I'm going to go this way, and I hope you're going to follow me. This, if it came to trial, would probably have come to trial about a month before the writing of Henry IV Part 2. Now, Henry IV Part 2 is somewhat strange among Shakespeare plays, and Lois is going to put me right here, but we actually know when it was written.
Well, we know that it was written after Part 1, and we know that it was written after a complaint of some sort about the depiction of a character called Sir John Oldcastle, because Lord Cobham was a descendant of the Oldcastle family, and supposedly members of the family objected to their ancestor, whom they took to be a Protestant proto-martyr, being depicted as a complete crook. In fact, in Henry IV Part 1, there is a speech in which Falstaff describes himself doing exactly what we're hearing about here. I mean, he says that he pressed, forcibly drafted a lot of people who had every reason to want to stay at home. And then, as he says, they bought out their services. And then he was left with either the people who couldn't afford to do it, or people that were picked up as replacements who were complete riffraff. And in part 2, we actually see this happen as opposed to just hearing about it. And we see Falstaff in front of the local justice of the peace, reviewing the people from this town that they've picked out for him. And as soon as the justice's back is turned, Bardolph, the lieutenant, the kind of equivalent of Thorpe here, I guess, is talking to the various troops, and those who could afford it buy out their service, and the others make the best of the situation, including a guy named Feeble, who says no man is too good to serve his prince, and so on. And when the justice comes back and discovers that I think he's supposed to choose 4 out of 6, and he chooses the least likely ones because the 2 most likely ones have paid him. The justice is obviously quite surprised, and Falstaff sort of makes up a story to account for it. I call him Falstaff now because between part 1 and part 2, he got renamed in order to keep the Lord Cobham, or descendants of the Oldcastle family, happy. But the episode, I mean, it's possible that it's based on something like this, but as I say, it is actually there in part 1 too, as simply as a description of what's happened off stage.
What was the difference? What's the time difference between part 1 and part 2? Do we know? I think part 1 is usually placed in about 1597. Yes, in that case, this government crackdown started in about 97 and carried on for a couple of years. So I would say that the two do relate. Got here.
It seems quite likely. I mean, after all, if Shakespeare would hardly have made Falstaff does a lot of dreadful things anyway, and he says at the end of part 1 that I've led my ragamuffins where they're peppered, and there are only a couple of them alive, and they'll be spending the rest of their lives as beggars. And he doesn't really mind because you got paid according to the number of people you had in your army, and he just collects all their pay after they're dead.
I mean, dead pay was one of the ways captains got their money.
It's true. You bought a captain's commission, right? I mean, either you got someone influential to give it to you, or you bought it.
Well, you certainly bought it later. I don't know about here.
I mean, in Falstaff's case, he didn't. I mean, it was given to him.
Yes, Hal gave it to him.
Yeah.
But I wondered about Latham, whether this might be part of how he recouped whatever he'd spent on his commission.
I think, yes, I think that came later. I think he would have been hired by the county of Wiltshire to conduct and train this unlikely group of people who he promptly tried to make a lot of money out of.
Yeah, I have Falstaff's speech here if you want to hear it, or we can go on.
Oh, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Okay. If I be not ashamed of my soldiers, I must soust Gurnet. I have misused the king's press damnably. I have got, in exchange of 150 soldiers, 300 and odd pounds. I press me none but contracted bachelors, such as had been asked twice on the bands, such a commodity of warm slaves as would leave here the devil as a drum, such as fear the report of a caliver worse than a struck fowl or a hurt wild duck. I pressed me none but such toasts and butter with hearts in their bellies no bigger than pins' heads, and they have bought out their services. Now my whole charge consists of ancients, corporals, lieutenants, gentlemen of companies, slaves as ragged as Lazarus in the painted cloth where the glutton's dogs licked his sores, such as indeed were never soldiers but discarded unjust serving men, younger sons to younger brothers, revolted tapsters and hostlers trade-fallen, the cankers of a calm world and a long peace, 10 times more dishonorable ragged than an old-phased ancient. Such have I to fill up the rooms of them as have brought out their services, that you would think that I had 150 tattered prodigals lately come from swine-keeping, from eating draff and husks. A mad fellow met me on the way and told me I had unloaded all the gibbets and pressed the dead bodies. No eye hath seen such scarecrows. I'll not march through Coventry with them, that's flat. Nay, and the villains march wide between the legs as if they had gyves on, for indeed I had the most of them out of prison. There's not a shirt and a half in all my company. And the half shirt is 2 napkins tacked together and thrown over the shoulders like a herald's coat without sleeves. And the shirt, to say the truth, stolen from mine host at St. Albans, or the red-nosed innkeeper of Daventry. And that's all one. They'll find linen enough on every hedge.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Well, this is Latham. I mean, I'm convinced that there is a connection. Rachael.
I was going to say, wasn't there some other play that we have been reading in Beyond Shakespeare where the subject of soldiers returning in like 1590 something came up? Is this my, oh, maybe it was just Sir John Oldcastle that we were talking about. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, there are soldiers in a lot of plays. I'm not quite sure which one you mean.
Huh.
Yeah, they're usually poor. I mean, when they return, they're usually without any money at all. And the dramatist generally seems to think whatever they do to make some money is probably okay, however crooked it may be.
Yeah, right. Well, what a wonderful interlude. Let us go on to our next case, which is from Norfolk and dated a year later. This is the Attorney General and Bowler, and Lois is to read first.
To the Queen's most excellent Majesty, showeth and informeth your Majesty, Edward Cook, Esquire, your Highness and Attorney General, that whereas the strength, safety, and preservation of the happy and quiet peace and tranquility of this your Highness realm doth very greatly stand and consist in the faithfulness, fidelity, and upright dealing of such captains, officers, and other persons as your Highness shall put in trust for the levying, pressing, and taking up of soldiers and men of war, to be employed by your Majesty's commandment for the annoyance of the enemies of God and your Majesty, and for defense of your Highness kingdoms and subjects, in respect whereof such lieutenants, captains, and other officers, so by your Highness authorized and put in trust, ought chiefly above all other persons to endeavor by their sincerity, upright and hearty zeal and loyalty, to advance your Majesty's service to their uttermost powers, and by all good means to win your Highness subjects to hearty zeal and loyalty, to adventure their lives in the face of your Highness enemies for the defense of their natural prince and country. And on the other side, there neither is now nor can be anything more dangerous and hurtful to the state of this your Highness well-ordered commonwealth than that such persons into whose hands and charge the strength and defense of this your Highness realm shall be committed, should for their own private lucre or other respect impoverish and discharge your Highness subjects by extortion, oppressing, or misusing of such companies as shall be under their commandment, whereby your Highness service in the weightiest affairs of your kingdom may be defeated, hindered, and overthrown.
But so it is, if it may please your most excellent Majesty, that one James Bowler of blank in the county of Norfolk, yeoman, nothing regarding the great importance of your Majesty's service, but applying all his care and endeavour to contrive, work, and compass his own private lucre and unhonest gains, and to extort and draw by divers indirect and unlawful means from your Majesty's true and faithful subjects great and large sums of money, the said James Bowler taking upon him to be a follower of some of the lieutenants of the said county of Norfolk by colour of the countenance and authority of the said lieutenants, or some of them, or of some person or persons that had or pretended to have authority and pretending to be employed in or concerning the leading, enrolling, ordering, sparing, or discharging of the said companies, or of some of the soldiers belonging to the same within the said county of Norfolk, did in the 36 year of your Majesty's reign corruptly extort and take of Robert Marmon of Stradbroke in the county of Suffolk, being then a soldier pressed in the county of Norfolk to serve your Majesty where and when he should be in your Highness' name and by your Highness' authority commanded, the sum of 26 shillings for the discharge or sparing of him the said Robert Marmon out of or from your Highness' said service, whereupon, by means of the said James Bowler, he, the said Robert Marmon, was discharged or spared, and taken from your Highness' said service accordingly.
And the said James Bowler hath in the said 36 year of your Majesty's reign under the colour and countenance aforesaid, corruptly extorted and taken of divers other persons to your Majesty's Attorney General, as yet unknown, being then soldiers pressed to serve your Majesty when and where they should be in your Highness' name and by your Highness' authority commanded divers sums of money, armor, and other things for the discharge or sparing of the said persons out of or from your Highness' said service, as namely the several sums of 20 shillings and 30 shillings.
And thereupon, by the means of the said James Bowler, grievous extortions, oppressions, and injuries committed by the said James, impoverishing and undoing of many of your Majesty's faithful poor subjects, may be punished with such condign punishment as the quality of the said offences doth require, and that all others to whom your Majesty shall hereafter put in trust or use in such weighty service may be admonished and warned to bear greater respect to the honour of your Majesty, the state of their country, and the just discharge of their own consciences, both towards God and also towards your Majesty.
It may therefore please your most excellent Majesty to grant your most gracious writ of subpoena to be directed unto the said James Bowler, commanding him thereby at a certain day and upon a certain pain therein by your Majesty to be limited personally to appear before your Majesty in your Highness High Court of Star Chamber, then and there to answer unto the premises, and to abide such punishment as by the order of the said court shall be inflicted upon him.
And here we have the answer of James Bowler, the defendant, to the information of Edward Cook, Esquire, Her Majesty's Attorney General. And it's a single big chunk.
For full answer and plain declaration of the truth, this defendant saith, that one Robert Marmon, in the information mentioned, being, as he said, pressed for a soldier at or about the time in the information mentioned, and having lately left, as he said, a farm of the yearly rent of 40 pounds by year, and not thoroughly provided to bestow his stock of cattle then remaining upon his hand, being acquainted with one William Corbin, a great friend and near neighbour unto this defendant, among other speeches that passed betwixt them, he uttered in great grief that if he then went out for a soldier, he was utterly undone, and the rather because of his said farm, which he so lately had left his stock of cattle not provided for. Whereupon the said Corbin, knowing the acquaintance the defendant had, was importunate with this defendant to ride with his friend Robert Marmon to Norwich, and use the best means he could to inform the deputy lieutenants of the said Robert Marmon his desire for his discharge, and to help him the best he might therein, which this defendant was hardly drawn unto, because he was loath to trouble any of his acquaintance, or to intermeddle with those matters. But at the earnest entreaty of the said Corbyn and Marmon in the end, this defendant condescended to their request, and did twice, upon purpose, ride to Norwich to effect the same, and once to Beccles, and did lie in the city 4 days and more only about that business. During his abode there, this defendant expended 30 shillings and more. And in the end, the said Marmon, his grief being set forth to the deputy lieutenants, without any 1 penny to this defendant his knowledge given, he was discharged. And thereupon the said Marmon allowed to this defendant 26 shillings towards his charges, as parcel of the said 30 shillings he expended in lying only about his business. Neither did this defendant take any money to be any minister or officer for any matters in the bill mentioned, neither did he labour for discharge of any other pressed or likely to be pressed for a soldier. And for further answer he saith, that he, this defendant, is not guilty of any of the misdemeanours or offences in the bill or information mentioned, and therefore most humbly prayeth to be dismissed this honourable court.
Well, here is certainly a different picture painted. Any thoughts? The cat disapproves.
I'm still not sure I follow it, actually. The defendant is not, in other words, guilty of having simply let this guy buy out his service, but has felt sorry for him, and with the support of this guy's friend has done what he could for them, and hasn't even been fairly remunerated for it. Is that his point?
Well, his point
Yes.
is that he's lost money. He's lost 4 shillings. And 4 days away from his own business. And the fact that he was given 26 shillings and the man was discharged, the two are not really in any way connected. He's saying not guilty.
But how was the man discharged? Was he pleading the case of this man, which is why he was discharged, or would the man have been discharged even if he hadn't been spending 4 days?
Who knows? But he went to is it the Lord Lieutenant he goes to? Someone who has the power to discharge.
Yeah.
Yes, he went to Norwich twice, and Norwich is the county town, right? The capital?
Norfolk, yes.
And once he goes to Beccles?
Well,
Yeah.
Beccles?
Yeah.
Beccles. Well, presumably whoever is organizing this impressment is moving about.
Yeah. It just says, in the end, the said Marmon, his grief being set forth to the deputy lieutenants, without any 1 penny to this defendant, his knowledge given, he was discharged. But his grief being set forth, it doesn't really say who set it forth.
Well,
I mean,
presumably he did. I mean, he was acting as advocate for the man.
yes, that's what I couldn't figure out.
And maybe Corbyn came along as witness, who knows?
But it's getting access. I think access is always a thing.
Yeah. Let's see. He says he was reluctant to do it because he was loath to trouble any of his acquaintance or to intermeddle with those matters. So that means he had some sort of influence, I suppose. I mean, he doesn't really make it very clear how he got this guy out of his service, but so I take it if this is true, if he actually acted as a kind of advocate for the man and wasn't even adequately paid for it, then that would be right. It's just that it's so oddly put. You get the impression this guy was discharged some way or other because somebody took his point that it was a hardship to him to be pressed into the army. But it just seems odd that if the defendant is trying to argue that, thanks to his endeavors, this man was saved. I don't know. I don't quite see why he doesn't make it a bit more explicit.
Well, it's written by his lawyer, who is being paid by the word. So maybe that has something to do with it. But I mean, from the sound of it, especially the preamble in the Attorney General, the sky is about to fall.
Yeah.
It's an appalling thing that's happened, and yet you either believe the Attorney General or you believe Bola, who says it was a hardship case. All I did was get him in to talk to the right man. And it took me a few days, and he paid my expenses at the inn, only it didn't really cover it. I didn't receive a fee.
Again, I wonder who turned him in.
One doesn't know.
Yeah. It just seems odd because neither of these people would have had any reason to turn him in. They should have been extremely grateful to him. So
yeah,
you feel there must be some other.
I mean, obviously, it would be known in the troop. It would be known generally that someone was being discharged. I mean, it is perfectly possible that if there was a largish fine, an informer would expect a proportion of that fine.
Yeah.
So I think information was laid against people, and it was probably known, well known, that the Attorney General was looking for such events. Let us move on to the third case. This is a much better documented case. There's a lot of it, but unfortunately, time has not been kind to the documents. And one day I hope that this group or another group like it will read this case in full, including the bill, all the answers, and the witness statements. The bill is long, it's faded, it's crumpled, it's torn, and it's very dirty. But sooner or later, it will be read. Today, we're just reading the most legible of the documents, a single answer, which will be followed by an extract from a casebook, which is going to give a different perspective on it. Now, the case is the Attorney General and Gresham and a number of other people. But we're dealing with one of the defendants, a man called John Hammond. And this is the answer of John Hammond, one of the defendants, to the bill of complaint of Edward Cook Esquire, Her Majesty's Attorney General, the complainant. And I think it's Rachel's turn.
The said defendant saith that the bill of complaint into this honorable court against him exhibited is altogether uncertain and insufficient in the law to be answered unto, for many apparent causes and divers imperfections therein appearing, without any just cause or good grounds of suit so to do.
Nevertheless, the advantage of exception to the uncertainty and insufficiency of the said bill, now and at all times hereafter to this defendant saved, for a full and plain declaration of the truth, of so much thereof as doth concern him. This defendant saith that neither about the said time in the said bill of complaint mentioned, or at any other time, he never received any sum or sums of money of the said Edward Hink or Edmund Murrell, or either of them in the said bill of complaint mentioned, for the discharge or for the procuring thereof. Neither were they or either of them discharged by his means or procurement. Neither did he take or receive any armor of them, or either of them, nor other things, or any money for the receipt thereof, or any money of them, or either of them, or for any ticket or other discharge as in the said bill of complaint is mentioned.
And the said defendant further saith, that one Buckingham, a soldier pressed for Her Majesty's service in the said bill of complaint mentioned, oftentimes repaired unto him in the behalf of one Simons Thane of Attleborough, to the end to procure his discharge. Whereupon, by his importunate suit unto him, this defendant, and he, this defendant, being moved with pity upon the piteous complaint of the said Buckingham, did go unto one John Brown, who then did keep the record or book of all the soldiers' names, desiring him in the behalf of the said Thane to discharge him, the said Thane, out of the book, if it were possible, who answered that he durst not do it, because Mr. Gresham, Esquire, in the said bill of complaint named, had his name in his book, upon which words this defendant was more importunate with said Brown for the discharge of the said Thane, being desirous to discharge him with as small charge to the said Thane as he could, which at last the said John Brown agreed unto, and put his name out of the book. Which being done, the said Thane, or his wife, which of them it was, this defendant knoweth not, sent unto this defendant the sum of 30 shillings, which he received by the hands of the said Buckingham, which they freely sent and gave unto him, this defendant, without any agreement, demand, composition, compulsion, before or after the name was so put out of the said book, of which said sum of 30 shillings, this defendant did give 10 shillings unto the said Brown. Neither did the defendant take or receive any armor of the said Thane, or any other sums of money for his discharge.
And the said defendant further saith that around about the time aforesaid there were pressed out of the county of Norfolk the number of 250 soldiers to be employed in Her Majesty's service. And being at the town of Harwich in the county of Essex, the lieutenants receiving certain letters from the lords of Her Majesty's most honourable privy council for the discharge of 100 of the said 250 men, and the soldiers understanding thereof, some of them repaired unto this defendant, desiring him to be a means to procure their discharges, and that they might be of the number of those that should be discharged. Whereupon this defendant did go unto one Gilbert Havers, gentleman, who had the discharging of the said 100 men in the absence of Sir Arthur Hevingham Knight, to procure discharge for 50 or 60 persons, as this defendant verily thinketh, after which discharge is procured by this defendant, some of them did freely and voluntarily give unto this defendant for his pains taken certain money, some of them 20 shillings, some 30 shillings, and some 40 shillings, and some of them nothing at all. Nor was it by any agreement, composition, demand, or compulsion before or after their said discharges procured. But this defendant doth not remember who did then give any money unto him for the discharges.
And the said defendant further saith that being commanded by Sir Arthur Hevingham Knight, one of the deputy lieutenants for the county of Norfolk, to have good regard to the armor of such as were or should be discharged, he, this defendant, appointed one John Durrance to receive and gather up such armor as was left in any place by any of the soldiers that were run away or that should be discharged, for which his pains they were entreated to bestow something of him, considering they were discharged of the carrying thereof, which was great ease unto them. Upon which request some of them did bestow upon him 6 pence, some less, and some nothing at all, by means whereof this defendant hath in his custody diverse and several armors, being received only to the use and for the benefit of the county according to the commandment of the said Sir Arthur, which is and hath been ready at all times to be delivered unto such persons, or to such hundreds to whom the same of right do belong.
And without this defendant, and without that, this defendant did receive any of the said sums or money or armor with any intent to oppress, extort, or otherwise to exact upon any of the said parties in such manner and form as in the said bill of complaint is alleged, all the said several parties did voluntarily bestow and give the same unto the defendant without any compulsion or composition made beforehand by this defendant for the same. All which matters this defendant will ever and prove as this honorable court shall award, and prayeth to be dismissed the same.
Okie dokie. Well, this is a new one.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what post hoc, but not propter hoc. I mean,
How could I help it if in their joy they thrust money upon me?
yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of the mistakes were made, but not by me. I mean, that bit about they were entreated to bestow something of him, considering they were discharged of the carrying thereof. Yeah, they were entreated. By whom? You know. Yeah.
Nice use of the passive voice there.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't have to carry your armor anymore. You don't have to look after your armor anymore. Caring or carrying, I wonder.
It's care.
Saying, you know, oh, we've relieved you of all that terribly heavy and high maintenance armor. How about some shillings?
Yes, I mean, the moment when you tell an army of disgruntled, pressed men that 100 of them are going home, I mean, you can imagine the queues that formed. And if he got 50 or 60 of them, who he was able to say to them, I got you out, he's going to walk away with a pile of money. Even if it's only 20 shillings a pop, you know, that's 50 quid.
Yeah. No, it really is just a case of, did I do it for that reason or did I just do it? I mean, everybody begged him to get them out. He went and got 50 or 60 people out, he thinks, and then they did freely and voluntarily give him money. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he had to, I suppose he had to discharge 100 of them. So some of them were going to get discharged whether they paid him or not. But yeah. I suppose if I were his lawyer, I'd argue that. But then I'm not a lawyer at all.
Yeah.
So.
But
yeah.
I mean, it shows a great deal of incompetence on the part of the government. You know, you press 250, then you decide you only want 100 of them.
Yeah.
Also, this is just a fragment of a much bigger case. The main defendant is Gresham. The entire impressment exercise seems to have been riddled with this sort of fraud. Hammond it's just one flea bite. But I do like the way he regards it as he's a constable. He regards it as a perquisite of his office that people just give him money because they like him. Yeah, he doesn't somehow ring true, does he?
Yeah.
Well,
no, it's so much like the present attitude to tipping, really. I mean, how far, you know, are you tipping people for any reason except that you feel you're pretty much compelled to? And it's like, I mean, say at the end of the trial scene in The Merchant of Venice, it's, you know, you must gratulate this gentleman, i.e. the lawyer, you know, give him something after all he's done. I mean, and that is a case where they seem to feel complete gratitude. But you know, we get other cases where I think the word tip is supposed to come from the initials TIP, meaning to ensure promptness.
Yes. Seems unlikely, but That I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, you know, the early modern world was built on this sort of interaction, though. Small amounts of money passing to make friends. I mean, I got a situation, there's a couple of aldermen from Hull on one side of the table and Robert Cecil, Sir Robert Cecil on the other. And they say, here is £20 in gold. And he says, no, 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 no. And they say, yes, 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 yes. And he says, no, 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 no. And they say, we daren't go back and say you refused us. And he says, oh, all right then. And takes it. And we know this because they write a report back to their people in Hull saying he took it. But no, this is how the world ran, the early modern world. You paid friends, you made friends. Partly it was a favour bank and partly it was just constant streams of small amounts of money.
And partly because there wasn't any really decent salary structure. I mean, every job, was predicated on the idea that you would get a lot of your money from tips from other people, not from the salary.
And in fact, some jobs you actually had to pay to get. Yeah, because the incoming was so, I mean, secretaries of great men could make a lot of money out of people who wanted to see the great men. Anyway, let us pass on to the last section that we're doing. We come now to the most remarkable part, because we actually know that this case was heard. And if I had been able to read on, we would know what the result was, because we have a report. A lot of English law depends on precedent, and unlike statute law, which had a known text, precedent was not officially recorded, nor at this stage were there books of precedents printed, or even much in the way of law texts. Lawyers were dependent on manuscripts, which were bought from other lawyers, made or copied by the lawyers themselves or by others. And in some families of lawyers, there were multi-generational books created. Now, this is from one of them. Often they're in Norman French, but the language of Star Chamber was English, and this report is in English too. This is a partial translation of a partial part of a report, and I hope to do better later. But here it is. Sorry?
No, sorry, I thought you were waiting for me to start.
No, I was just thinking of if there was anything else that I needed to say about it. I don't think so, though. In Camera Stellata, the 4th day of February, in the 38th year of Queen Elizabeth.
This day was heard at large the matters of complaint here exhibited by Edward Cook, Esquire, Her Majesty's Attorney General, against Thomas Fimston, John Hammond, John Boatwright, Edward Clear, Esquire, Thomas Hayward, Thomas Sego, John Brown, Edmund Newark, and John Friedman, defendants, for their corrupt exactions and extortions by them unduly received and taken by unlawful procuring the discharge or sparing of certain soldiers pressed or threatened to be pressed in the county of Norfolk for Her Majesty's service.
Upon the hearing whereof Her Majesty's attorney informed this court that where the Queen's most excellent Majesty of her most prudent and princely regard to govern, maintain, and preserve her realm in continual tranquillity and peace, and the better to defend the same, having in the said 36th year of her Majesty's reign caused several musters to be made, divers and sundry places within her Highness said realm, for levying and pressing of soldiers, and taking up of sufficient and able persons for her said Highness service.
At which time, certain lieutenants and other officers being authorized by Her Majesty's commission for the same purpose in Her Highness County of Norfolk, where the said defendants dwell. The said defendants aforenamed little respecting Her Majesty's most prudent and watchful care in seeking by forces to preserve the inward peace of this realm, but wholly minding to contrive and compass their own private, unlawful lucre and benefit by the impoverishment and oppressing of diverse their Majesty's loving subjects, and then chosen and pressed or threatened to be pressed for soldiers within the county of Norfolk, did very unlawfully and corruptly take and extort from a great number of Her Majesty's loving subjects, being pressed or threatened to be pressed for soldiers within the said county of Norfolk in the 6th and 30 year aforesaid diverse and great sums of money for their discharge or sparing of and from Her Majesty's service.
As by the said Thomas Firmston, being an attorney at the common law, but taking upon him or pretending to be employed in Her Majesty's said service for the discharging and sparing of Her Majesty's said loving subjects, being pressed or threatened to be pressed for soldiers, as is aforesaid, at his pleasure did in the said 6th and 30 year of Her Majesty's reign corruptly extort, agree for and take of Robert Womack £5, of William Davy £6, and of Osbert Bull by the hands of one Thibauld 42 shillings, and that said that without payment of the said several sums of money they could not be discharged.
And that the said defendant, John Hammond, being a chief constable of the said county of Norfolk, in the 6th and 30 year aforesaid, in like manner did extort Simon Thane 20 shillings, Robert Sumley 20 shillings, Richard Swan 20 shillings, Edmund Dyke 20 shillings, Matthew Osborne 10 shillings, and from others divers and sundry sums of money, and did also cause and constrain of one Rafe Stone, besides 10 shillings, half a bushel of malt and a peck of rye, given to Francis Chamberlain, a brother of the said John Hammond, saying that without payment thereof they could not be discharged.
Now, when I have beaten the case book into submission, I will know what the verdict was, but I think, in fact, I already do. They were all found guilty. So, what we need is more case books. Now, I found the Wiltshire case, the first case we read, quite by chance, and was struck by the resemblance to Henry IV too. I mean, substituting Bardolph and Nym and Pistol. I think, no, Pistol wasn't there, was he?
No.
He was still in London. But substituting all these various people for the names there, it struck me that bull pit and bull calf, what's the difference? So I went looking for others, and I was surprised because it is very, very difficult to actually pin down cases. I was surprised to find two relatively easily. And I think, personally, there are a lot more, all clustered around this time. Cook was fairly new to the job, and he was definitely feeling his oats. And he'd chosen Star Chamber as an easy way of bringing everybody to court. And it did mean that a number of cases that might otherwise have been heard in Star Chamber were thrown out because his cases would probably take precedence, as the Privy Council would want to hear this. Whereas they would be less inclined to hear stories of stalkers in Lancashire or domestic violence in Hull. Okay, now, has anybody got anything to chip in? It's Eric.
I think it was when we were trying to, being weird as we are, it being very, how do you call it, historically conscious as we are. We were trying to sort of find, when we did the Vicars of Threakenham case, we were trying to hunt down, what was happening and stuff. And, there was letters from the Earl of Wiltshire, I think, if I remember correctly, that I'd found on. I mean, I couldn't read the letters because access online is not ideal if it's not in the National Archives or uploaded. But I mean, I seem to remember there was one case where they had found that soldiers had been relocated from somewhere to somewhere else when the Spanish Armada they were not relocated. They were being basically sort of mustered for purposes that they couldn't explain. This was right before the Armada, but by bishops and by that kind of thing. And I was wondering if that's the kind of thing going on here, just sort of. But this was like bishops going, like looking for, basically paying, salarying soldiers for that kind of thing.
Well, yes, I mean, it's perfectly possible for a bishop to have a civic role in his see, in his diocese.
Yeah, because the bishop oversees the church lands. He has an estate and a manor and things, doesn't he?
A lot less than he had before the Reformation. Yeah. Rachael, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, what Eric just said is making me think, what is the punishment for this crime? If somebody, like, what exactly would it be labeled under if they're found guilty for this?
Well, it's covered in a general pardon, it would appear. I mean, it's extortion, it is. But whether it's felony extortion, I don't know. If it's in Star Chamber, it should be a misdemeanor. If it's a felony, it ought to be before other courts. But as it's the Attorney General, I think he can get away with bringing an awful lot into Star Chamber that wouldn't otherwise. I mean, the penalties for this could be quite severe. The Star Chamber mutilated. This was usually taking one or both ears. They could imprison, they could impose enormous fines. I mean, really family wealth crippling fines. And they did. But we can tell from the Exchequer of Receipt that some of these fines that we know about, which would have taken the whole family wealth, barely a tenth was ever paid, and nobody chased the rest.
Is that just because the bureaucracy was so inefficient?
I don't think so. I think part of it was that it was a threat that could be held over them. I mean, if you had got some landowner and you had this massive Star Chamber fine sitting potentially on his back, he was going to be very keen to do whatever the current reigning member of the Cecil family wanted.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I mean, in the Jew of Malta, it's a much more elaborate thing, but the Turks have deliberately let the tribute paid by Malta lapse for several years, and then they sweep in and want it all at once, and it creates a terror. But it's a kind of comparable case. You let something lapse, but there's always the possibility that you might seize it, so nobody can ever feel quite secure.
Also, they definitely believed in repentance. So if you were properly publicly contrite and admitted your fault and said you would never, never, never do it again, this could greatly reduce your punishment. And I'm not just talking about Star Chamber here. I'm talking about the whole of criminal law. The 39 articles say the purpose of the magistrate is to punish with the civil sword the stubborn and evil doers, and the stubborn come first. So
yeah,
provided you are willing to make a public recantation and promise faithfully never to do it again, you get let off a tremendous amount of the penalty.
Yeah, it happens in, Eastward Ho, which is a play I've been editing. Actually, several things are relevant to this, because two of the characters are actually taken up and brought before a JP, and it says under color of a great press. In other words, and it was, in fact, this was 1605. They had been impressing people, and then this gives them an excuse for taking hold of these people and bringing them in, and then they are in fact thrown in prison. And then there's a great deal later about their penitence and who is most penitent, and the play actually ends with this apprentice singing a long song, a ballad about how penitent he is, and he's forgiven immediately by everybody. And I came across a few references as well in things to do with the livery companies to terrible behavior from apprentices who then groveled appropriately and got let off, sometimes for really quite awful behavior, it seemed to me, but kind of adolescent rebellion. But everybody was, I suppose, so used to that anyway. And there is this common idea in the drama that the worse you are as an adolescent, the more moral person you're likely to be once you've repented.
Yes, that's an interesting idea. I don't know many people to whom that's happened.
You mean they started out worse and they stayed worse?
Yeah. You look at the child and you see the man. But it's interesting that Eastward Ho has these presses, but that's quite a bit later, isn't it? 1605, did you say?
Yeah, 1605. Yeah.
But don't we also have that in sort of pretty much any history play, like the Troublesome Reign, not Troublesome Reign, sorry, I mean the Famous Victories, where you've got sort of the cobblers trying to sort of make a living and not really wanting to go into the army, but then they end up going into the army, and sort of. Yeah.
I like the way the Attorney General says that what these captains are supposed to do is to imbue people with a martial spirit, full of zeal to throw themselves at the enemies of God and your Majesty. Yeah, Eric.
My favorite part was that we hope that the people after this will be more, will be admonished and bear responsibility more, weightily than their predecessors, because that always works. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's it was a very corrupt age. Are we pretty well done now? Is there any more that we wish our viewers to know? In which case, it only remains for me to thank our wonderful readers and to say goodbye, and as is your and my bounden duty, to pray for the Queen.